All right. Well, thank you for joining Congressman DeSaulnier's virtual grants workshop. We are fortunate to have an esteemed panel of guests from 9 federal agencies here with us, and we will be introducing them shortly. Panelists will present in 2 panels, each followed by a brief Q&A session, followed by a session on grant writing and research. We will take questions from Zoom, as well as questions that our office has already received prior to this event. To ask a question through Zoom, please submit it through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I would now like to introduce Congressman DeSaulnier.
Thanks, Taylor. I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to thank the panel. I just have a moment to talk to them before we opened it up, but I really want to thank you all for attending and thank them. We are very fortunate in this country to have a lot of people who have chosen public service as their career, I would say vocation, and you're about to hear from many of those individuals and examples of thousands of others. I know Americans have always been a little bit skeptical about government and public service, and unfortunately nowadays, because we get criticized often for those of us who are in public service for our motivations to do that, but there is another side of that. A lot of terrific people who do it for the right reasons, and we all benefit from that. Okay to question government, that's part of our culture in America, but it's also, I think, appropriate for us to be thankful for people who do this work. And no better time right now as we come out of COVID and realize how many wonderful people who are government employees help to make us safe, help to develop with the private sector the vaccines that are making us safe, but have also put those vaccines into our arms that make us all safe. So it's a good example of the value we get. So thank you all for joining us. Please let us know your experience. We want to make all of what we do in the district efficient and effective for our constituents, and we want to know how we can improve. So these grants are great grants. A lot of thought went into them. I am not the author of any of them, or although I do get to vote for reauthorization. So the Congress does by statute and by budget appropriation facilitate obviously the funding and the structure of these grants. So they come from you through your representatives, but it's your money. So it's all of our money. So we want to make sure we're being wise and effective about being good stewards of that money. So thanks so much for joining us. I look forward to listening to the presentations for as long as I'm allowed to stay on. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Congressman. For our first panel, we will hear presentations from representatives of the Small Business Administration, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Once the panel has presented, we will take questions from the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. To begin, we will start with Julie Klaus from the SBA. Ms. Klaus, we'll now turn things over to you.
Thank you, Taylor. And thank you, Congressman, and your team for putting this panel together today. I certainly appreciate opportunities to provide information to people because, you know, there's just a lot of programs and resources that people don't know about. So all of these platforms are great ways to communicate. And I'm going to try to share my screen here to walk you through just a short PowerPoint presentation. Not to be death by PowerPoint by any means, but just to give you a quick overview, because we have a lot going on in our agency. You might have heard a few things this past year, but I'm really taking a focus on just the grant side of things. And I will say, SBA is traditionally not a grant-making agency, and we still, even with all the COVID programming, we still do not have grants available if you want to start and launch your business. So even this past year, the grants that became available were for existing businesses as a way to help them mitigate some of the effects of COVID on their business. So I'm going to walk you through like 2 different pieces, like COVID related grant programs and then the non-COVID related grant programs. And then before we get into that too, I just was going to take a quick second to give you the this really quick overview of everything SBA. Most of what we do provide is not necessarily in the grant bucket. Most of our assistance is direct from SBA or through some of our resource partners. And through our resource partners is a lot of where the grant opportunities come into play. So, we'd have access to capital, and these are everything from microloans all the way up through venture capital. And those are provided through our partners, our resource partners, or in the case of guaranteed loans through your banks, banks and other financial institutions. Government contracting assistance is also something we engage with, again, providing direct assistance. Sometimes we do leverage usually contracts, but once in a while, we do offer grants through this program. And that the grants are not direct to small business. They are to technical assistance providers who can then provide training and other educational resources to small businesses. And I'm going to walk through some of these things in more detail. The biggest grant opportunity usually falls in our business advising and education bucket. This is where we provide free one-on-one business advising and low and no cost training programs. You've probably heard of some of these organizations, such as the Small Business Development Centers, SCORE, Women Business Centers, and a Veterans Business Outreach Center. So those are grant opportunities for organizations to provide assistance to small businesses. But then the pandemic hit and our disaster bucket scenario exploded. And we have a mixture of loan programs and grant programs. So for purposes of this webinar, just going to talk a little bit about the grants. So these are programs that are direct to small business support, and there are still some of them available. So I just wanted to quickly highlight them. There's lots of other webinars we're conducting if you want to take a deeper dive into any of these programs, but I did want to flag some of the opportunities that are still available for direct to small business grants to support your business through this very challenging year and a half that we've had. So the biggest ones people have heard of lately, our newest ones, if you will, is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Both are grant programs that are direct to small business payments, traditional, grants in the sense that you don't have to pay them back. The Shuttered Venue Operators Grant is focusing more, it operates more like a traditional grant. It is for entities that are one of the ones on the screen, live venue operators. It does touch on the performing arts heavily, although some museums and some movie theaters might also be eligible. This is an active and open program. So if you fit into one of these categories and are interested in applying for grant assistance for your business, you can go directly onto our website and apply directly online. There's a ton of information on our website too, so I do encourage you to read, especially our FAQ document, because that'll really talk about the definitions, like what exactly is a live venue operator? What exactly is a talent representative? A lot of these definitions tie to the statute that authorized us to do this, so it might not be the definitions you would think of offhand. So I do encourage anybody in this world who thinks they qualify to go ahead and read through some of the documents on our website before they apply. Similarly, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, a very narrow niche for restaurants and food service industry, but it includes a lot in that bucket, right, as you can see on this screen. This program has been tremendously successful. In fact, as no surprise, it is overprescribed at the moment, but the portal is still open and accepting applications for the really small businesses in this case. We're still accepting applications for businesses that had 2019 gross income of less than $50,000. So again, this might be some of our food trucks or food carts, or maybe you were in a restaurant industry and you started late in 2019, so you didn't have a lot of revenue in 2019. This program, like I said, it opened on May 3rd and it has been extremely popular. We're already I think we're already a little over 3 or 4 billion that's actually been dispersed, but the applications that have come in has been 266,000 for a total of somewhere around 69 billion that has been asked for, and we're only appropriated 28.6 billion. So so that program has been obviously very successful and trying to meet a very big need. And then I also want to point out the direct to small business grant, again, is this targeted EIDL advance. So the EIDL program, the EIDL program, was a loan and still is a loan that any business can apply for if they need some assistance. It's a working capital loan, so it can cover the gamut of any business expenses you might have. But associated with that is a separate program was this, in 2020, it was called the EIDL Advance. It was part of the CARES Act. We quickly ran out of money in that program. The targeted EIDL Advance came after that through subsequent legislation and reauthorized a twist, if you will, on that program, and also gave us more money. So this is a program that if you applied for the EIDL Advance over the summer in 2020 and received less than $10,000 or did not receive any funding because the money had run out, the targeted EIDL Advance is you'll be getting an email that invites you to come and apply for this, because we're really trying to reach those two audiences, those who received less than 10,000 initially and those who did not receive anything in 2020 because the funding had run out. So this is an invitation to apply because of the way the program is structured and the criteria. So then let's jump now. I know that's really quick, but let's talk about some of the non-COVID related grants. And the one that is, again, direct to small business is our Small Business Innovative Research, SBIR, and Small Business Technology Transfer Programs, STTR. So what this does is leverage dollars from the 11 biggest agencies that have R&D needs, and they have to set aside a portion of their money to work with small businesses, to invest in, if you will, seed start small businesses. So this is for the agencies that have some sort of scientific research need, but then we also look for a chance to commercialize the product or the result of what the research shows us. And the best example for this program is a company called iRobot. I think most people are familiar. They fulfilled a need originally with the, I think it was Army, one of the DoD branches, that had a need for a battlefield robot that could kind of sweep for mines. And so then the commercialization side of that is what we all know is the Roomba, the vacuum cleaner. So this is an example of what this program can do. It can help from conception of the idea to building the prototype to then actually launching it and then eventually commercializing it. And there's lots of information at sbir.gov. But then the guts of it is really these kinds of programs, which are non-COVID grants that we offer, but they're not direct to small business. They are for typically nonprofits, sometimes state entities or local government entities. And the crux of this is to provide them funding to then in turn provide technical assistance to small businesses. And you can see there's a variety of different programs that kind of target different populations. So STEP program targets export development. Prime program targets micro entrepreneurs. Our core programs of our SBDCs, Women Business Centers, and VBOX. And then a brand new one that's coming out, actually, I'm going to encourage everybody to watch for it. Hopefully we'll be having some public information before the end of the month, is the Community Navigators program. And this is designed to, again, provide money to what we're calling hub organizations, who are then going to work with spoke organizations that are in different communities. And we're really trying to reach into communities that maybe have traditionally been underserved by SBA or underengaged with SBA for any reason, for, could it be a language barrier, could be lack of knowledge, any number of reasons. So we're trying to work with organizations that are already embedded and trusted and culturally acknowledged in these different communities so that we can really get the information out to the people, the small businesses who could really benefit from taking advantage of some of these services. So that one's the newest one coming soon. I would say watch grants.gov. We'll be also blasting out about it on Twitter and our other social media. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I know we have many more speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. And next we are joined by Michael Huff. Michael is with the United States Department of Housing, Region number 9. Michael, Mr. Huff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you to your team for really allowing us to have this, this really timely conversation and opportunity to share information. Very, very important to do that. So thank you. So I am with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and housing is definitely something that's really important now, and as well as urban development. So my goal today is to kind of go through, and I think I have some slides if you want to put those up, is to go through an overview on what HUD provides, and to really condense a lot of information. So I only have 6 slides, and one of them is an intro slide. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that, as the Congressman mentioned, government works best when it has a place-based approach, when it's not top-down, but actually has relevance to the local community. And that's one of the things that HUD has done. And it actually clarifies some of the grants that HUD provides. So HUD provides grants primarily for rental assistance and for home buyers. And this is very general because there are a lot of different opportunities under that. Works to combat discrimination. And that's kind of the general aspect I'm going to go over today, because there's a lot of moving parts, but I think you'll understand how to reach that information at your local area. So the first thing to look at is that HUD has offices and programs, and they're administered. What's interesting, they're administered locally. So we have what's called a department called Community Planning and Development, and they provide block grants, and I'll get into what those deal with. But you can see on the screen that it works and helps communities to develop. That's something that's very important now, and that's something that HUD provides. The second one is we have an Office of Public and Indian Housing, PIH, and it is the one with the overall scope that provides the housing assistance for individuals. You've heard of Section 8 vouchers and other things for low and moderate income individuals. Then, as I mentioned, for homeowners, there's FHA. We've all heard of FHA, and there are additional programs under that. And then the final one is the FHEO, the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. And I'm sure we've heard of different things related to housing discrimination and trying to alleviate that. Next slide, please. So I think the thing that I want to make sure I get across is when we talk about grants, HUD uses at the federal level, a formula. So actually information and money, the dollars and funding would actually go to your local area, to your state or to your city or area. The funds aren't distributed by HUD to individuals, but you actually have the ability through your local area to have access to that. And as you see, there are different examples. For example, the formula has to, whenever funds are provided by your local area, your government, it needs to aid low and moderate income persons, prevent or eliminate blight or conditions, and meet an urgent need that threatens health. So obviously communities we're talking about have that kind of an issue. At least 70% has to go to low and moderate. And then if you look at the examples, the CDBG funds are used to renovate housing, construct or improve public facilities. You'll see water, streets, neighborhood, real property, assets, and assist private businesses. So that in the nutshell kind of explains how it's a place-based approach, how this money comes into your community through nonprofits, through your municipal agencies, and then it's dispersed. Next slide, please. And this is the PIH, the Public and Indian Housing Rental Assistance. So in this case, the funds would come from HUD based on a formula to your public housing agency. So every location has a city, has county, has public housing authorities that work with HUD to provide the funding out in the form of Section 8 vouchers or rental assistance. So for more information, and if you know people who need rental assistance, they're actually would start with their public housing authority to receive the funds that have come through HUD. Next slide, please. And just to make this visual, I wanted to put a slide in that shows how the flow works. And so as the Congressman mentioned, Congress appropriates the funding to the different departments throughout the government. HUD is one department, so HUD receives the funding, and then HUD provides that funding to the PHA, Public Housing Authority, and then the Public Housing Authority, you can see how it distributes those vouchers to the individual who's part of the program, or the supplemental payments to the landlord or owner. Next slide, please. And so this is the final slide. I put this up because this is one of the new initiatives that has come out related to the American Rescue Plan, and it deals with emergency housing vouchers. And you'll be hearing more about this, but the vouchers are actually coming out. You'll see 70,000 vouchers are being awarded to approximately 700 public housing authorities across the country. And vouchers are coming to California and going to the different public housing authorities in California. So keep your eye out for those. If you have questions, your public housing authority can actually provide more information about if they have vouchers, what the time frame is, and you'll see that information, actually the 5th of May, they got information about it. So they'll be communicating out to the different public housing authorities about what is available. And I wanted to mention that after you deal with public housing authorities, sometimes people will reach out to their local public housing authority and they might not receive the type of response that they need. So HUD has assigned what are called portfolio management specialists who have a group of public housing authorities that they interact with. So if you have a question that a public housing authority isn't answering or you need more assistance, you can actually ask them, who is the HUD portfolio management specialist? Or you can actually go on our website to get that information. But we wanted to make sure you have resources that are local. And so what's nice about it is the public housing authorities that are local know what's available in the area, but they also are aware of the funding coming through. And now you know that there's funding coming through and it's considerable. I think that's basically what I wanted to cover, and we'll see if there are any questions. Thank you very much, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Michael. Next, we are going to be joined by Carolyn Singh with the Department of Justice. Ms. Singh, we will now turn things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Congressman, for inviting DOJ to discuss our grant programs and funding opportunities. My name is Carolyn Singh. I'm with DOJ's Office of Legislative Affairs. Perfect. Before going into the substance of our presentation, I want to note that although I won't discuss all of the materials in the slides, we have included additional information about resources that may be of interest. And Taylor, please feel free to share our slides if anyone requests it. Also, if you're unsure which office to contact, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. My email and telephone number are on the last slide. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. At DOJ, we have three grant-making components: the COPS Office, the Office of Justice Programs, and the Office on Violence Against Women. Today, I'll give a brief overview of those programs, as well as our state and local law enforcement section, which conducts outreach on a broad range of law enforcement issues with states and localities. Next slide, please. With regard to the timeline for fiscal year 21 grants, applications are opening on an ongoing basis, with awards expected to be made by September 30th. So for anyone who's looking at applying for any DOJ funding opportunities, we have a number of them that are already open for application. And let's go to the next slide, please. So this slide includes the web links where those funding opportunities can be found online for each of our grant-making components: OJP, COPS, and OVW. The last link on this page includes information about a new grants payment and management system. When you click on this link, you'll be taken to a number of resources related to training, as well as how to get help or troubleshoot any issues you're encountering with the new application system. Next slide, please. And before I go into our three main grant-making components, the last set of general resources I wanted to mention relate to the department's response to COVID-19. In addition to possible administrative relief, DOJ created an elder fraud hotline as part of our Elder Justice Initiative. The hotline is available every day, and help is available in several languages. The purpose of the hotline is to aid in reporting frauds and different types of scams that impact seniors. So we encourage you to take advantage of these resources and share it with anyone that might find it of interest. Next slide, please. Next slide. So our state and local law enforcement section works with communities, law enforcement, different types of government officials, whether it's elected prosecutors, district attorneys, and different types of local government officials to increase engagement and communication with, throughout the country. And this work includes working with trade associations as well as organizations to address a broad range of issues impacting DOJ's work. And let's go to slide 9, please. Next slide. Perfect. The contact information for my colleagues, these are our advisors to the Attorney General, Dean, Theo, and Dennis. Please feel free to email or give them a call if you have any questions, and they would be more than happy to help you. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so our first main grant-making component is the Office of Justice Programs. The Office of Justice Program has a number of offices under its umbrella that focuses on crime-fighting efforts, funding victim service programs, and a very broad range of funding opportunities. You might already be familiar with some of the offices: the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, our Juvenile Justice Office, the Office for Victims of Crime, as well as the Sex Offender Tracking Office. Next slide, please. In addition to funding, we also have a number of free resources and training that are available. Examples of those programs include Amber Alerts, the Burn Justice Assistance Grant Program, drug treatment courts for adults, veterans, family, youth, a number of mentoring opportunities, school violence grant programs, sexual assault kit initiative programs, and a number of gun crime reduction and violent gang programs. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. Next. Okay, perfect. So I know that you also have a section on grant writing, so I skipped over a number of those basic slides. But one of the programs that I wanted to point out for you, it's funding through our Office for Victims of Crime. The Office for Victims of Crime fund what is commonly known as VOCA funding, which is made available to state administering agencies. So the states would would make these funds available through a number of programs. The main categories include victim assistance and victim compensation programs. In fiscal year 20, the state received over $195 million in victim assistance funds and over $19 million in victim compensation funds. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot of where the OJP funding opportunities are located. And if you were to click on this link, let's go to the next slide. You'll see a number of current funding opportunities. The list is much longer than this, but this is just to give you an example of the current opportunities that are open for application. And you'll see they relate to a broad range of issues, whether it's addressing victims of hate crimes, sex trafficking, human trafficking task forces, opioid issues, and substance abuse, as well as reentry, second chance, and a number of mentoring programs. You'll see there are 2 deadlines associated with each of the solicitations. By looking at each of them, you'll see more detailed information about application requirements, eligibility, as well as contact information for our grant management team. So if you have any question along the way, please feel free to reach out to any of those individuals, and we'd be more than happy to help troubleshoot your application process. Next slide. And here's the contact information for the Office of Justice Programs. If you go to the website, you can also feel free to reach out to their communications office and also follow them on social media. Sometimes when new funding opportunities become available, that's a great way to sort of get timely information in addition to what you probably already follow through grants.gov. Next slide, please. Next slide. The next main office at DOJ is our COPS office. The COPS office advances public safety through community policing. It was established in the early 1990s and has invested more than $14 billion to community policing efforts. So that includes things like funding police officer salaries, developing crime-fighting technologies, and a very broad range of things that help support community policing. Next slide, please. This slide just lists the funding opportunities that are expected to be available through the COPS office this year. Many of them are already open for application, and they include our COPS hiring program, the school violence prevention program, community policing development, and a number of other programs related to mental health and wellness and drug abuse and task forces. Next slide, please. In addition to the grants available through the COPS office, an important resource I wanted to mention was the Collaborative Reform Initiative. The Collaborative Reform Initiative is free technical assistance, what we call training and technical assistance, but it's a free technical assistance center that works with local law enforcement and communities on a broad range of issues related to policing. So if you're interested in getting web-based training, in-person training, virtual mentoring, or any on-site consultations to help deal with policing or any police reform issues, this would be a terrific resource. And again, it's free. Next slide, please. Next slide. This slide includes the contact information for the COPS office, and same with the Office of Justice Programs. By subscribing to their social media, you're able to get timely updates on when solicitations become available. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the last main grant funding component at DOJ is the Office on Violence Against Women. The Office on Violence Against Women, its mission is to provide federal leadership in addressing a number of crimes that are authorized under the Violence Against Women Act. So those include what are typically called the 4 VAWA crimes: domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Next slide, please. This lists the examples of types of programs that are funded through OVW. They address a very broad range of issues that fall under the Violence Against Women Act. They address programs that target individuals with disabilities, culturally specific services, tribal programs, as well as campus sexual assault initiatives, and a number of more. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So as with OJP and the COPS office, OVW offers a number of webinars. This is just a link to a podcast on how to apply for OVW grants. Please feel free to browse the slides more in detail, but this link would be a terrific resource for anyone interested in applying for grants available through the Office on Violence Against Women. Next slide, please. And here's the contact information for the Office on Violence Against Women. Next slide, please. And if you have any questions or unsure which office to contact, here's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out, and we'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction and help troubleshoot any of your questions. And with that, that concludes my segment. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Before we move on to our next presenter, I do want to just make sure that we mention that this is recorded, and we will be sharing this in our upcoming grants newsletter in June. And if you'd like to subscribe to the grants newsletter, please feel free to email me at taylor.kimber@mel.house.gov. Before now, our next presenter, we are going to be joined by Debbie Raffi from the Department of Defense. Ms. Raffi, we will now turn things over to you.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Congressman, for inviting the Defense Department to talk about their grant programs. Slides. Go ahead and show slide number 1. All right, thank you. So if there's only one takeaway from the DoD grant discussion, it's this website. Grants.gov. This is primarily where all the information is you need to learn about Department of Defense grant opportunities. And let me just pause while you see an O&R logo on the top left-hand corner of my slides. I'm actually representing the Defense Department, but my job is with the Office of Naval Research, and we issue our research grants and our STEM grants on behalf of the Navy. So. But I will be talking about all the DoD opportunities. So this website is really your window into the Department of Defense opportunities. On the left side there, the basic search, there's actually a lot more search criteria you can use, but if you really want to get us started on the Department of Defense opportunities, just the key word is defense, and you will see a very long list of grant announcements that you can read about and then consider whether you're interested in applying. Next slide, please. As far as our grant opportunities, we have 2 basic areas where we use grants to fund our opportunities. One is research grants, and the other is STEM. So this slide is addressing the research grants. We have different types of research grants. Probably our most common are the basic research grants, and that typically goes to nonprofits and universities that have a basic research program. We also have university research instrumentation grants, which helps pay for expensive equipment to assist in doing research that the DoD is funding. We also have multidisciplinary university research grant program, which lets multiple universities collaborate on a research topic. And then we also have our Defense Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, DEPSCOR. This is in most of the states. And then again, this is to stimulate research at a university maybe that is not maybe an R1 university like a Stanford. And so that's targeting a competitive community of research performers in the academic space. And then we also have research grants that assist with the HBCU and minority institution community. We are doing a lot to communicate more in this area and make sure everybody understands the DoD opportunities relative to research grants. The broad technical areas that we are interested in looking at a research grant I mean, it's endless. I just put a couple here. It's as diverse as going from the medical topic to oceanography to alternative energy topics, autonomy, and then there's so many subsets under each of these categories. Artificial intelligence has so many applications. That's a very long list to itself. But the idea here is that the technical areas are extremely broad. So I would encourage that you take time to look at the research opportunities there. Next slide, please. I'm providing these 3 websites because the services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, their particular website will provide a bit more information that you will see on grants.gov. And so there is their website link for each of the 3 services that predominantly fund research grants. I will say that the reason I say grants.gov is such a key website is all our application processes in the DoD go through grants.gov. So that's why that's your doorway into an application process. Next slide, please. Okay, STEM is our other main assistance area. And our STEM grants are really directed in 2 different ways. One is funding to assist STEM educators or nonprofit organizations or even industry with hosting and conducting STEM activities. And we just love creative ideas from performers. And so that's one type of grant that we fund. A second type of grant that we fund is to the actual students, and it's K through college, to participate in STEM activities, whether it's a science challenge or just a technical competition, or we have what we call white paper STEM activities, where we just want students to read a technical problem and give us a 1-page or 2-page white paper on how they think they would solve that technical challenge for the Defense Department. And the website snapshot at the bottom half of this slide, one way to narrow down your search, if you're interested, if your mission as a performer is STEM or STEM related, you can enter in the keyword search DoD STEM, and that will narrow down your search as far as the grant opportunities there. Okay, and I think that's my last slide, correct? So, all right, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to the panel, and I'll stick around for Q&A. Over.
All right, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And just again, I wanted to mention that we will be sharing this recording for the grants workshop in our newsletter on our website as well. And again, if you have any other questions or if you'd like to be added to the newsletter, you can email me at taylor.kimber@mel.house.gov. And next, I will turn things over to Kevin Cohn from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank you, Kevin.
Good afternoon. How is everybody today? I'd like to thank the Congressman again, as everybody, for inviting the Department of Veterans Affairs to this workshop. And I'd especially like to thank Taylor. Thank you for all your help leading up to this workshop, making sure I didn't embarrass the VA and had information to share. That's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So today I'm just going to, the Department of Veterans Affairs, we don't have a lot of grant programs, but what we have is pretty focused and direct. And I was just going to run through our existing programs. And we actually, for the first time in several years, have new grant programs that will be coming online in the next couple of years. And I was just going to discuss those briefly. Roughly, VA each year runs a little more than $2 billion through our grant programs. Now, in the last couple of years with the CARES Act, we're now a little bit more than $3 billion. We do currently in this fiscal year are administering 9 grant programs, and we right now know that we have 4 more coming online and possibly 6 more that will be coming online here in the next couple of years. The VA, we break our, kind of to simply define it, we break our grant programs into 3 categories. We have our normal competitive discretionary grants, we have 2 construction programs, and then we have 2 per diem programs that I'll discuss in the next
Kevin,
slide.
I just want to I just want to let you know we can't see your screen, Kevin.
Oh, you can't see my slides?
No, we cannot. Yeah. Do you need us to do it for you or?
No, hold on one second. Let me just go back. I hit the button. Now Miss. You see
There
it
we go.
now?
We can see it. We can see it now.
Oh, I apologize. No, so this is just some of the things I was talking about. This is our funding. And of course, these slides will be shared, are more than welcome to be shared. And I actually going to probably add to this and get an update to this. But here's what I briefly talked about: our funding, our programs, our type of programs. One thing that is different at VA than a lot of other agencies is we don't have a centralized grant agency or function. So each of our grant programs are pretty much run out of the level, out of their individual offices. It's very decentralized, and VA is a pretty large organization with about 380,000 employees. So it kind of, it's hard to always find the programs easily, but at the end, I'll have my contact information. If you ever want more information, I can definitely point you in the right direction. So here's a list of our programs and their funding for, oh, actually this is FY21. I mentioned the construction program. So we have state home construction program, which basically we fund, I think we're at about 165 state-run veteran homes, and we pay for 65% of construction and upkeep of those homes. And it's a formula based on, you know, categories. Obviously, life safety moves them to the top of the list. And the next thing we have listing here is we have an adaptive sports program, which is, it's relatively small, but very effective. It's for disabled veterans and disabled active duty service members. And it provides adaptive sports programs throughout the country. It has proven to help with suicide prevention, relationships with family, et cetera. It's a very popular program. We have two homeless programs. The first one being the Homeless Grants and Per Diem program. This is to assist public and nonprofit entities to help with homeless veterans or veterans that are at risk of becoming homeless. Then we have the State Home Per Diem. This is kind of related to the state home construction. Once those beds are built in those beds, we pay a daily per diem rate for veterans that are in those state homes. It's kind of like a Medicare or Medicaid payment based on type of level service connected disability type of care that they're getting, and we pay that. The second homeless program we have is VA supportive services for veterans and families. Now this program is very good. It's been around for about 10 years now, but it's grown thanks to Congress from originally first year being $59 million, and now it's up to this year $387 million, and next year it's moving to $420 million per year. And what this program does, it provides many different services to veterans that are either homeless or have risk of becoming homeless. It can pay for rent, pay to get your car fixed, pay for transportation, job interviews. It's got a large level of different services that is eligible to be paid. It's been very effective through its 10 years of existence, and I hope it keeps going on for 50 more years. The next program that I just want to touch on is our Veteran Cemetery Grant Program, and this pays for state, local, tribal entities to apply for it to build or upkeep or do certain things on some veteran cemeteries they may run. The next program we have is Rural Veterans Transportation Grant Program. This provides for veterans that are living in what is designated by the Census Bureau as highly rural counties across the country. We provide transportation for them to get to VA medical centers or outpatient clinics or anything that they need to get care. We will go pick them up, or a grantee, not VA, a grantee will go pick them up, take them to and back to their home. This next program is a special adaptive housing technical assistance grant program. So we have a benefit program inside the VA, which is special housing, adaptive housing. It's for disabled veterans. So we will pay for, if you have to have a ramp put in your house or different things inside your house to make it, that you can live a comfortable life. We will provide that benefit to you. What this is a grant to do research for new technologies in adaptive housing. And then the final program is a program basically for states, and it's to make sure it's nurse retention, to make sure if, let's say that, a certain state, is having problems either competitively or something to retain its nurses, we can pay to increase their salaries. And so they don't lose that existing staff. The next slide, I just want to talk about some of our new programs that are coming online. The first one, we have the Staff Sergeant Fox Suicide Prevention Program. This was a program that was just authorized by Congress and signed into law in October. We are working very hard to get this online as quickly as we can so we can start providing these grants out. It's a large program. It's a 3-year program with $184 million over those 3 years. And we hope through a lot of other things like the Prevents Initiative and the federal government that it will be effective and move forward. The next one is the VA Atlas Telehealth Program. And this is a program that provides emerging technologies to provide telehealth care to veterans, especially in rural areas where they don't have that access. So as an example, we would set up a pod in a Walmart, and it would be a secure and closed pod, and there would be an assistant there to support. And basically the veteran could go in, close the door, there'd be screens there where they could talk to a physician or a nurse at a VA medical center. They could do diagnostics there. And it just, if they didn't have, the ability to get to a medical center, an outpatient clinic, it could provide, certain types of care there at a local level. The next one we have is a third coming online, homeless veteran legal services. So this is that supportive services can provide some type of legal services, but there's others that they're not allowed to. This program expands on the type of services we're allowed to provide to homeless veterans or veterans, again, at risk of being homeless. This can include, disputes with landlords, child custody, things along those lines. It's got a wide array of services that they're able to provide. And then the last one that we have coming online, it's the Veterans Legacy Grant Program. It's kind of an interesting program. It's to provide grants for local communities to work with schools and stuff, to work with cemeteries to basically honor the veterans that are buried in those cemeteries by telling their stories. And so that there will always be honoring the veterans, that have come before us. Sorry, I'm a veteran. I get a little choked up with that. But in that we hopefully will coming online here. Actually, this is probably coming online here in the next 6 months. It should be made available. And that's kind of a list of our programs. Again, I apologize for being brief, but if you ever want to contact me, feel free to. I can put you in touch with, you can ask me about our grant programs. I can put you in touch with those programs or give you information about them. Many of those new programs, they have communication packages already put together if you want to know more information about those programs. So I can definitely assist in that. Again, I'll just be your pivot point. If you go on grants.gov and you look up Department of Veterans Affairs, my name is listed there. So I get these calls and emails all the time, and I have no problem with it. I will do whatever I can. If I can't answer the question, I will find the right person that can. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And now we will move into our question and answer section of our webinar. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you have additional questions, please feel free to contact our office, and we'll be sure to pass along these questions to the panelists as well. You can email me or call our general numbers, that we'll make sure to provide you with that information. Our first question is going to come from Victor from Pittsburgh. Victor wants to know what additional grants opportunities are available for small businesses under 10 employees who are already received 2 rounds of PPP but are still struggling. And I believe that is for you, Julie.
Sure. So in the grant, we've got the grants and the loan programs, and they can work together or separately. So for the grant programs, really the two that are left are for the very niche industries. So that is the shuttered venues and then the restaurant food service industry. So I'm not sure if you're in one of those industries, but those two grant programs are still available. Otherwise, if you've already taken advantage of PPP, with the forgiveness piece has the effect of a grant. There are really no other grants to apply for at this time, but there is the EIDL loan, economic injury disaster loan, which is a working capital loan, and it's for for-profits and nonprofit organizations, and it's a low interest rate, 30-year term, and you get at least an 18-month deferral on making any payments. So for people who need working capital support now, it is a very viable option, and you can apply right through our website, and my team and I are happy to talk you through that whole process.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. Our next question is going to be for Michael Huff with HUD. Rich Kitty from San Pablo would like to know what grants are available for transitional living housing programs like reentry, sober living, etc., and how do we apply? Is there a link or contact info?
So that's interesting. I think that's actually one for DOJ, because DOJ has the residential facilities. Yeah, that would be, I think DOJ would probably be a better resource for that, related to residential for the reentry.
Yes, and that is correct. We have a number of programs that are available. If you follow the current funding opportunities, some of them have already closed for this year, but some are still open for application. By clicking on one of the links to the OJP current funding opportunities, you'll be able to find the list there. And of course, if you have any trouble navigating the site, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much. And one last question for this panel, and then we will, due to time, we will need to move on to our next panel. However, if you do have a question, we will make sure to get your question and send it to the correct agency, and the panelists will make sure to get back to you or through us. Our last question is for the VA. Are states the only entities eligible for the cemetery grant, or can cities apply for this funding as well?
Yeah, excuse me. It's for state, local, and tribal. So it's available for pretty much every governmental level, from state down to local and tribal. The one thing I forgot to mention, and I didn't have a slide for it, because I heard there may be some VA employees that work out at medical centers and stuff and asking, are there grants for VA employees or people that work at medical centers? We do have some internal grants. Now, we don't call them necessarily grants of the VA because they're for VA employees to do research on VA facilities or associated, like university hospitals that are associated with the VA. So if anybody wants any additional information on that, feel free to contact me. And I don't work with them directly like I do with our outfacing grant programs, but I can definitely give you a point of contact in that office if you want to know more information.
Okay, we are going to take one more question. Yolanda, Yolanda asked, grants.gov is not a friendly website for nonprofits that are focused on social services for a specific target population. Any tips for user-friendly usage outside of the basis? And any one of our first panel can answer that.
So I know I can just speak from the SBA side that we do utilize grants.gov, and there's some instructional webinars and things to try to help people, because I know it can be arduous process. We are trying to leverage Grant Solutions a little bit more, which is newer, and I'm told a little bit more user-friendly interface. But you can also usually find the information if you want to read the notice of funding opportunities first. Those are usually available on our website as well. But then the actual application, unfortunately, does need to flow through grants.gov or grant solutions when it comes to SBA at least. But we would definitely like to connect you with resources to help you better understand those tools.
This is Michael from HUD. I'd like to interject that I believe the upcoming grants workshop, that grant writing piece, can be very helpful because you'll understand, it'll teach, give some cool clues and best practices on how to really specify the words and terms that you use, and then to set up some tracking functions as well.
Great, thank you so much. And panelists too, please feel free if you see something that is suspicious. I cannot talk, I'm so sorry. I've been talking this whole time. Specific to your agency, please feel free to respond back to the panelists if they, to our attendees. If you see something like, oh, I have the answer to that, please feel free to do that. But right now we are gonna move on to our next panel, and I'm so excited to introduce, we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. I believe we have Laura Watson here from the Department of Labor. So Laura, we'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Let's try again with mute off, okay? Hi, I'm Laura Watson. I'm the Chief Grant Officer at the Department of Labor. I don't know if you guys, do you want to jump into my slides or I can just talk from them?
We do have your slides. Would you like us to share them for you? And
Sure.
We're starting to share them for you.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. So today, I'm going to go over our funding overview, how we develop our funding announcements, our application process, common application errors, and what to expect after awards are made. So most agencies are on a fiscal year from October 1st to September 30th. The Employment and Training Administration within the Department of Labor also has a program year, which operates from July 1st to June 30th. And that is our Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act funds, and that is the majority of our competitive funds. So many of our funds are underway right now because why June 30th is just around the corner, and that is equivalent to other agencies' September 30th. Next slide. So areas that we routinely have competitions and write funding opportunity announcements include adult reentry, youth, that should be youth reentry, youth build, workforce pathways for youth, apprenticeship, community colleges, and the workforce opportunity for rural communities is restricted in our appropriation for those areas along the Appalachian Regional Council area and the Delta Regional Authority. So those two specific geographic areas are, we have to have a competition for those funds. And then we have some high growth funds. And so each year, as we look at our appropriation for these type of programs, which come each year, we would look at evidence evaluation reports. We would look at performance reports from grantees. We would read articles by sociologists and economic indicators, what businesses are coming, what jobs will be available. And we use all that information with the appropriation that we've been given to develop our FOAs. Next slide. So our process, which you may be familiar, is we do that research, we publish the opportunity, we have an open period, then we receive the applications, we check and make sure that you've submitted all the required documentation. We have a merit review, as the uniform guidance requires us to do a risk assessment before award decisions are made, and then we make the awards. Next. This is a very important slide. Grant competitions are very competitive. And I happened to hear the last question from the panel about grants.gov being difficult and do we have to use it? Yes, we do. particularly in this pandemic. We are no longer in the office. We are not accepting paper applications. So don't wait until the last minute to submit. You sign into grants.gov, you're not familiar with it, you forget your password to grants.gov, you have 10 minutes to get this big document submitted, tick, 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 and you can't get in. Your authorized representative is out sick that day. Please, all of our solicitations say submit early. We recommend submit several days early. If you're still making refinements, you can submit again, and we will take the application. Department of Labor will take the last one you submitted. So don't wait until 10 minutes to 4 if it's due at 4 p.m. or 11:50 if it's due at 11:59. I just can't tell you enough to not wait until the last minute. Common errors that we've had during the pandemic are a lot of people are scanning, or if they print their application, then they scan it in, and one piece of paper gets stuck to another, but yet they think their full application has been scanned and they upload the PDF. Well, sometimes that one piece of paper, if you had a simple budget, your whole budget was only on one piece of paper, and then you're disqualified because it looked like you did not submit a budget because it was two pieces of paper that were stuck together. So make sure that if you happen to be scanning papers through a copier, that part of your application is not left out. We've had applicants forget to upload a certain PDF or file. Double check if you know, oh, this FOA opportunity requires 4 attachments. Make sure the files you've submitted are 4 different files. Make sure you don't submit 2 of one file and then you're disqualified because you accidentally left one file off. Check the funding announcement. They will have must-do items listed. You must have this. You must have these partners. If it's a must, there's no exception. And if it's the Department of Labor, we actually put the must-dos in a screening list, and we put it separately on the funding announcement, so you can print that page and make sure that everything on that checklist you have included in your application. Partnerships are very important in our grants. We are the public workforce system, and we want to make sure you have businesses involved. We may want to make sure you have a community college, a workforce development board. So if we say you must have letters to prove that you have established partnerships, please make sure that's included in your application. And again, SAM, the System of Award Management, is a registration that is required. And again, don't wait until your application is due to make sure your SAM registration is current. When you begin writing your application, you should make sure your registration is current. That will give you a month to contact SAM, get your registration up to date. So the day of submission, that's one thing you don't have to worry about. Any questions on these common errors? All right, we'll go on.
And Laura, we are going to do a Q&A after.
Okay. Next slide is what to expect after you've written a good application. What will happen when you get a grant? You'll have a grantee orientation. You'll get to know your federal project officer. That is the federal person assigned to your grant to give you advice as you move along in the project. You may have a need to request for some technical assistance. Some programs have contractors and technical assistance available, and some programs are limited. And we expect from you to report quarterly performance and financial information. Not all agencies require quarterly reporting, but the Department of Labor does. Your federal project agent officer will take those performance and financial reports, and do an internal quarterly desk review to make sure you're on track, you're meeting benchmarks, your expenditures are at a good level. The Department of Labor, we do monitoring visits. Usually our grants are about 3 years long, and we like to come and visit. In the old days, it was in person. During COVID times, we still conduct monitoring reviews, but it's all electronic. We do like Teams calls. We'll ask you to submit documentation through protective measures because we don't want any PII going through emails that is not secured. And we will do a review and see if to ensure that you're following the uniform guidance and that you are meeting the benchmarks of your grant agreement. And if you spend over $750,000, you'll need to have a single audit, or our Inspector General is very active in auditing our grantee world. Next slide. What if your application is not selected? Please, first of all, don't be offended. Grant funding is very, very competitive. Only the very top, I don't even know if I would say 2% of grant applications are funded. I mean, you have to have extremely good scores to be funded. And just keep in mind, I would love to fund almost every application, but we only have funds that Congress has appropriated. From the Department of Labor, if you're not funded, you will receive a letter that says, unfortunately, you were not selected, and it will give you instructions on how to obtain feedback. You email the person that's listed in the letter, and you will receive written feedback from the merit panel that tells you your weaknesses of your application. The Department of Labor, we don't have the capacity to do a debrief with each applicant. So we do not schedule those meetings in order to be fair. You have the written feedback from your panel. And if you use that, we would encourage you to apply again the next year, because as I said in the beginning, our subject matters of what we compete each year generally stays the same. Next slide. And that is the ABCs of the Department of Labor grant funding cycle.
Thank you so much, Laura. And again, as a reminder for our panelists, if you guys see a question that that is towards your agency or that you feel that you can respond to, please feel free to respond in the Q&A chat as well. But next, we are going to turn things over to Ellen Jones. Ms. Jones is with the National Endowment for the Humanities. Ms. Jones, we'll now turn things over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me to hear about the grant opportunities and resources offered by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Here's the key message. All you really need to know from the next 10 minutes if you need to go get a snack or something. All of this information is on our website, NEH.gov. NEH programs are competitive, but you won't get a grant unless you apply. If you're thinking about applying for a grant, make sure you read the Notice of Funding Opportunity, also called the guidelines, and that will help you write a better application. But most of all, talk to NEH program officers. They want to help you however they can. The National Endowment for the Humanities supports public and scholarly engagement with the humanities by making grants to nonprofit organizations and individuals. Our grantees are schools and libraries, museums, teachers, and scholars. NEH is a federal agency established in 1965, supported by taxpayer funds. All NEH employees are public servants working to be good stewards of those funds. Every year, NEH awards about 750 grants ranging from $6,000 to $750,000. In the last fiscal year, we awarded about $132 million in grants, plus another $67 million in emergency coronavirus relief grants. This summer, NEH will also award another $135 million in grants from the American Rescue Plan. The endowment's work focuses on the humanities, which is the public and scholarly study of human society and culture. Here's how Congress defined the humanities in 1965. They include history, literature, art history, philosophy, archaeology, religion, jurisprudence, and the humanistic social sciences. NEH supports the humanities across the country in several ways. We strengthen teaching and learning in classrooms from kindergarten to college. We support vital research and writing in the humanities. We nurture public programs that engage Americans of every age. We fund libraries and museums that preserve and disseminate cultural resources. We strengthen humanities institutions, large and small. We encourage new technologies and methods for research in the humanities, and we support state and local engagement in the humanities. In addition to all of our regular grant programs, NEH is also preparing for the 250th anniversary of United States independence in 2026 by funding projects for a more perfect union. This initiative promotes civics education and a deeper understanding of American history and culture. Applications to NEH programs do not need to respond to this initiative, but we are supporting a good deal of programming on these themes. I've told you about the kinds of things that NEH grants can support, but there's also a list of things our grants cannot support. We don't support humanitarian work like feeding the hungry or opening daycare centers. We also don't support the creative arts. That's our friends at the NEA who we'll be hearing from soon. That includes autobiography, fiction, and poetry. We don't make grants to students. We don't support political advocacy or policy studies. And we don't support research in science or the quantitative social sciences. You may also be wondering who is eligible to apply for an NEH grant. Most of our grant applicants are US-based nonprofit institutions like libraries, museums, or universities. They must have 501c3 status. A few programs are designed for individuals, supporting scholars doing research and writing. That can include independent scholars as well as college or university faculty. Applicants must be citizens or resident in the US for at least 3 years before the deadline. Students are not eligible. The best source for information about the endowment's work is our website at neh.gov. It has all of our grant programs and a lot of other information. On the site, you will find information about how to apply for a grant. You can see the link there at the top of the page. And at the bottom of the page, you'll find an online database with all of our previous grants. When you click on the Grants tab, you will find a list of all of our grant programs with links to information for each of these programs. We have 38 programs, so I'm not going to go into each of them today, and it might seem a little bit overwhelming trying to find the right program for your project. Here's a hint. The NEH is organized by the audiences for grant projects. Each of our divisions targets different groups, so you should think about the audience for your work and then look at grants from the appropriate division. If your project is serving the general public, like museum visitors or people watching documentaries, you should look to the Division of Public Programs. If your project is aimed at researchers and library users, your grants are probably in the Division of Preservation and Access. If your project is classroom focused, look at the Division of Education Programs. If you are doing research and writing for scholars or general readers, those grants are in the Division of Research Programs. If you are creating new digital technologies, look at the Office of Digital Humanities. And if your organization is doing major fundraising, turn to the Office of Challenge Programs. The site includes a page for each grant program. Each page will tell you the application deadline, the funding statistics for that program in recent years, and who to contact if you have questions. The most important information on each page is in the guidelines called the Notice of Funding Opportunity. These documents are long and a bit bureaucratic, but grant applicants should spend some time reading them. They'll tell you who can and cannot apply for a grant, what grants can and cannot support, what an application should include, and how applications will be evaluated. Also on this page is a list of recently funded applications, which will give you a sense of the kinds of things a program can support, a set of sample applications that you can use as inspiration for your application. Here are some of the most common errors that we see. Sometimes folks ignore the guidelines. They don't make a case for the significance of their projects. They include an incomplete or no work plan at all. They use jargon and they don't plan ahead in time to complete their application in advance of the deadline. As I mentioned a while ago, this is a competitive process. For many of our programs, we can only fund 10% of the applicants we receive. Don't be discouraged if you get turned down. Don't take it personally. Instead, make plans to reapply. The most important thing you can do is to request the comments from the peer review committee. Our evaluators take the review process seriously and do their best to write constructive comments for each application. Whether you get a grant or your application is rejected, you should request the comments because you'll find them very helpful as you continue your work. If you have questions about the panelists' comments, contact a program officer. They can help you interpret the comments and strategize for a new application. And if you get turned down, reapply. Our experience is that applications are much more likely to be successful the second time around because the applicants have clarified and strengthened their application. Remember that NEH staff are public servants and want to be your allies. We support public and scholarly engagement with the humanities because we believe in the humanities and their importance for American culture. If you take away nothing else, know that NEH staff are happy to talk to you by phone or email. Program officers can help you navigate through the grant process from application to final report. They can help you determine the right grant program for your project. They can offer advice on preparing applications. And for many programs, they will read and offer feedback on draft proposals. You should also know that every state and territory has a humanities council supported in part by the NEH. They advance knowledge and understanding of the humanities, and they increase public awareness of access to and support for the humanities all across the United States. They play a critical role in supporting NEH's mission and goals at a local grassroots level. If you're seeking financial support, especially for a public humanities project, you should contact your state council. Your state council is California Humanities, which is headquartered in Oakland. I encourage all of you to look at their website to learn about their programs and grant opportunities. Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to follow up with me at congressional@nih.gov. I'm happy to answer your questions or connect you with one of our program officers.
Thank you so much, Ellen. We appreciate it. Next, we are joined by Mary Sellers with the National Endowment for the Arts. Ms. Sellers, the floor is now yours.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you to the Congressman's office for hosting today, and thank you attendees for tuning in. There really is so much value in these presentations, and I'll personally always learn a bunch of new resources from my federal colleagues, so thank you so much for hosting. And so for those who aren't familiar with the National Endowment for the Arts, we are an independent federal agency, and we're dedicated to funding, promoting, and strengthening the creative capacity of our communities. And we do this through programs and initiatives, and we provide all Americans with diverse opportunities for arts participation. So my goal today is really to demystify some of our application process. I want you to leave this session knowing that the NEA is a funding resource for nonprofits, schools, local government, and more. And we are able to fund roughly 45% of our applications. That changes slightly each year, but that is pretty good. So we encourage you to submit an application, and we welcome applications from across the country. My presentation today will also provide an overview of the NEA, the grant programs we offer, and tips on how to apply. So our funding supports arts projects. So on the left side of the screen, you will see the types of organizations that are eligible to apply for funding. So we fund tax-exempt organizations, that's 501c3s, units of state or local government. So that includes local arts agencies and educational institutions and federally recognized tribal communities or tribes. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see examples of things that we are not able to fund. So that includes general operating support, individual artists, commercial activities, and fiscal sponsors. And there's a full list of these items that are detailed in our published guidelines on our website, arts.gov, arts.gov. So there are certain requirements that you must meet in order to be eligible to apply for an NEA grant. First, you must have federal tax exempt status at the time of your application. You must have a 3-year history of arts programming, although you don't need to be an arts organization. You just have to have 3 years of arts programming history. And you must be in compliance with reporting requirements for previous NEA awards if you've received them. You also need to be able to provide a 1-to-1 cost share match of non-federal funds. So that match can be achieved in a variety of ways, either cash, in kind, combination of the two. You can use staffing costs or program expenses related to the project to make the match, as well as volunteer time or other in-kind donations. So our grant review process includes 3 levels of review. The first level of review is a citizen panel, which is made up of experts in the field. All of our panels are diverse in terms of geography, gender, ethnicity, and expertise. The panel recommendations are then submitted to the National Council on the Arts for their review and approval. The council then forwards its recommendations to the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and then the chairman does the final review and approval. So these are the different, the main funding programs that we offer at the NEA. So the first is our partnership agreements. Similar to NEH, these are our designated state arts agencies, and we also have 6 U.S. regional arts organizations. So by law, 40% of our grant funds are designated for the states and regions. So I encourage you to look into California Arts Agency, and they all have great resources for you as well. And the Arts Endowment funding opportunities for organizations, those include Grants for Arts Projects, Challenge America, Our Town, and our research grants. So Grants for Arts Projects is our main principal grant program for arts organizations. And then Challenge America and Our Town, they each have a little bit of a more specific focus. So I'll get into that in just a little bit. And then Grants for Individuals are limited to our literature fellowships for creative writing and translation projects. So I mentioned that there are 3 primary programs for arts organizations, those being Challenge America, Grants for Arts Projects, and Our Town. So you can see the deadlines for these programs. Challenge America is typically in April, so it just passed. One in February and July for Grants for Arts Projects. So there's one coming up on July the 8th. And then the Our Town deadline is typically in early August. So I'll give you a brief overview of each of these programs. And then after we're done, I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these specific ones and connect you with any staff that might be able to give you more information. So the Challenge America program primarily supports small organizations to extend the reach of arts to populations that are underserved. So all organizations must address how their organization or audience has been underserved. So this term is defined by our legislation and agency policy and refers to those opportunities, those whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by geography, ethnicity, economics, and/or disability. All of the awards are a flat $10,000. And as I mentioned, the deadline just passed in late April. Challenge America also seeks to address potential barriers for organizations to receive federal funding. So this year we rolled in a few aspects to try to lower the access to getting funding. So that includes an abbreviated application to make it shorter and easier for applicants to apply. We kept the $10,000 standard amount to make it really simple and easy. And we've added a bunch of robust technical assistance to really facilitate the entry to arts endowment funding opportunities. So this can be a really great starting point and entry point for anyone who's looking to potentially get a grant from the NEA. The Our Town program provides support for creative placemaking projects. So what exactly do we mean by creative placemaking? So The most simple definition is about strengthening local communities through arts and culture. So creative placemaking is when arts, culture, and design activities are deliberately integrated into efforts that strengthen communities. So our successful Our Town projects ultimately laid the groundwork for systemic changes that sustain the integration of arts, culture, and design into local strategies. There are some additional requirements for Our Town program. So eligibility does require a partnership between a nonprofit and a local government. And I was able to find an example of an organization that we funded in 2019, RISE, in the California area, and they were funded to support youth design workshops that informed architectural and interior design for a new cultural facility in Richmond, California. So that's just an example of a local who received a grant. There's lots more. And we anticipate that the guidelines for this program will be rolled out in the next month or so, along with a webinar to explain them. And their staff are always ready to answer any questions. So that's a little bit about Our Town. So the Grants for Arts Projects is our principal grant program for arts organization. And this is also our largest funding opportunity. We fund around 2,000 grants for this program each year throughout the US. The applications are submitted to one of 15 artistic disciplines in either February or July deadline. So as I mentioned, July 8th is the deadline coming up. And funding is available for all stages of the artistic process. So including creation, presentation, and exhibition, arts education and enrichment, as well as services to the field. So conferences, professional development, that sort of stuff. We fund projects that are large, we fund small projects, we fund ones that have been in existence for a long time, we fund brand new things. Projects can be in any place in the US, all 50 states, DC, and the US territories. All grants require at least a 1-to-1 match, and the grant funds range from $10,000 to $100,000 and can be up to 2 years. So another example of a local local organization that received funding from us in your area. So in 2020, Nava Dance Theater was funded to support the creation of presentation of a multimedia South Indian dance and visual arts production exploring class and cast constructs in South Asian diaspora. So that's just another example of an organization that we funded. So in addition to our regular grant program, the NEA will distribute $135 million from the American Rescue Plan. I know a lot of my federal colleagues mentioned that earlier in their presentation, so we also will be giving out money for that. And of that, 40% has already been allocated to state and regional arts organizations for re-granting. So definitely look in to see what California Arts Council is doing and see if there's opportunities there for you to apply. And we will then be distributing the remaining 60% to arts organizations and local arts agencies, so local government. And we expect to have those program guidelines posted in mid-June. And just a general sense of what you can expect is funding is going to be available for general operating mainly. And the guidelines are being developed to really reach a broad group of constituents. And that includes organizations that serve populations that are underserved. It also includes organizations with small and medium-sized budgets, organizations from more rural places, more urban communities, organizations that may be applying for the NEA for the very first time. We're really opening it up wide to make sure that we are reaching every congressional district, including this one. So one way you can kind of track to see what's going on with our American Rescue Plan news is our newsletters. We send out newsletters about monthly or so. And so how you can sign up for that is by going to our website. At the bottom of our website, there's a button you can press that says newsletters, and there's a whole list of topics that you can select from. I work on the partnership newsletter, and I know that's really robust, and it doesn't include just NEA information. It includes deadlines from other organizations. It includes webinars from the field. So if you're looking for a great place to get sort of good resources about the arts, this is one way to get that information. So here's my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions offline that you can think of afterwards. Thank you so much for sticking with us. I know this is a long presentation, but so much fruitful information. And I will say that one good takeaway is that the federal government can sound really intimidating, and we're throwing so much at you, but all of us are really here to help, and we want you to submit the best application you can, because it makes our jobs easier and also makes your job easier if you have someone you can contact. So really happy to chat with anyone who has any questions. Thank you so much, Taylor, and thank the Congressman as well.
Thank you so much, Mary. And lastly, to wrap up this panel, we are joined by Dr. Connie Bodner from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We will now turn things over to you. And Connie, before you get started, any of the panelists, if you see a question that is geared towards you, please feel free to respond in the Q&A. Connie?
All right. Oh, thank you, Taylor. This is terrific, and I'm delighted to be with everyone today. On behalf of IMLS's leadership and staff, I want to thank Congressman DeSaulnier and for inviting us to participate, and especially you, Taylor, for making it easy for us to do this. I want to give you a really quick overview of our funding programs with the hopes that you'll see something in there that piques your interest. And like my colleagues have said, our website is the place for all the important information, but I'm hoping as we go along here, you just might jot down an idea or two that you want to pursue. We'll talk a tiny bit about eligibility. We'll give some hints and tips and point you to some important resources that are designed to help you put together that good proposal. We'll take a second or two to look at the peer review process, which is so important, and then we'll close with our condensed best advice, some of which you've already heard, but I think it will bear repeating. IMLS is an independent federal grant-making agency. Oftentimes we're referred to as are you really that small? And we are. We're a tiny agency, but we think we do mighty work. We're the primary source of federal support for the nation's libraries and museums. And we are here to help ensure that all Americans have access to museum, library, and information services. The fact that we support institutions rather than disciplines is one thing that distinguishes us from our sister agencies, but by doing it this way, we're able to support the arts, the humanities, and sciences of all types. In addition to making grants, we also convene groups, we conduct research, and we publish, but all of that is in order to build the capacities of museums and libraries to serve the public. We are led by a director who is a presidential appointee. It's confirmed by the Senate, and they are advised by the National Museum and Library Services Board. This is a snapshot of our current funding, and on the top you see that we also have received some American Rescue Plan funds for FY 2021, and below that is what we call our normal budget. And about 93% of that normal budget is designated for grant making, and about 7% goes for administration, research, and evaluation. Our focus today is going to be on our discretionary grant programs, and these are the ones that you'll most likely be writing an application to. But before we get to that, it's important to know that about 77% of our normal budget is distributed to states and territories through our Grants to State Library Administrative Agencies program. And each state gets an allotment of funds each year, and it's based on population. And this year, about $26.3 million are coming to California through our normal budget, plus a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act funding. For details on specific programs, highlights of California's 5-year plan, and sub-award opportunities for California, please do visit the state profile webpage that's listed here beneath the picture. This amazing work is coordinated by Greg Lucas of the California State Library, and his contact information is listed here as well. So who can apply for our funding? Well, generally it's nonprofit museums and libraries that are located in the US, the territories, or a freely associated state. But federally recognized tribes and nonprofit organizations that primarily serve Native Hawaiians are eligible for certain programs, as are colleges, universities, associations that support museums in their work, and museums and HBCUs whose missions are focused on African American history and culture. There are some additional requirements relating to the number of days that an institution needs to be open and what their staffing level is like. So it's really important to explore and understand the eligibility requirements for each grant program that you might be considering. The flip side, who's not eligible to apply? Well, that would be for-profit organizations, individuals, federally funded institutions, and foreign countries or organizations. But I do want to point out that entities that are not eligible to apply for our funding can be partners to projects that are funded for other organizations, or they can certainly be third-party service providers. I like to show this slide because the word museum includes an amazing array of organizational types that might not even think of themselves as museums. So we put those here. And libraries come in many, many different forms too. So we list them as well. Just because museum or library may not be in your title doesn't mean that the IMLS might not consider you one. So keep that in mind. And we'll turn now to our discretionary library funding programs. And I will give you a blisteringly fast overview of each of our grant programs and encourage you to go to our website for more details about anything that, that might catch your attention. The first two are for Native American library services, and we have several of these grants active in California at this time. Our basic grants program is designed to simply improve core library services and to facilitate the adoption of new and emerging technologies for the benefit of tribal communities. And although the deadline for 2021 has just passed, we expect it to be a little earlier next year, so you won't even have to wait a whole year. We think it'll be on March 1. And grants here range from $6,000 to $10,000, and there is no cost share requirement. Our enhancement grants support activities with very special emphases on digital services, educational programming, and preservation and revitalization. So those applications will be due March 15th next year. These awards go from $10,000 to $150,000, but also with no cost share requirement. And our Native Hawaiian Library Services program is structured for much the same purposes as our enhancement grants, but the ultimate audience, of course, is Native Hawaiian individuals and communities. We have two larger library grant programs that are designed for very different purposes. National leadership grant programs for grants for libraries typically take on the big problems, the resolution of which will have wide-ranging benefit and utility. And there are 4 funding categories, and these differ in project focus and in the dollar amounts that you can apply for. And on the right-hand side, you see the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program. The purpose of that program is to support developing a diverse workforce of librarians and archivists. Like National Leadership, there are several project categories, each with its own focus and dollar amount and cost share requirement. Important to know for both of these is that the application process has 2 stages. We ask for 2-page preliminary proposals to come in the fall, and this year those will be due September 24th. And then those are reviewed, and a subset of those are then invited to submit full proposals in the early spring. And those full proposals will be due March 25th, 2023. Funding can be as much as $1 million for these categories, and projects can extend for 1 to 3 years. And the cost share requirements vary, but typically they are not terribly onerous. So turning now to our museum funding programs, and important to know here is that we have 6 programs and all of them have the same due date for applications, and that is November 15th, 2021. So if you're just starting to think about this now, I commend you for your sense of timing because it's perfect. We're going to start by talking about two technical assistance programs. These are not grant programs, that's why we call them technical assistance, but they are designed to help small and medium-sized museums build capacity. And in MAP, the Museum Assessment Program on the left, this means a capacity in museum operations. And in CAP, it's capacity in collections care. Both of these programs are administered for us by nonprofit organizations here in DC, and they are both excellent. I participated in both when I was on the other side, and they were hugely helpful. So I'd really encourage you to visit their websites and to contact them with questions. Because both of these programs involved on-site visits, our plans have been disrupted because of the pandemic, but we expect that activity to resume soon, and you'll get good information from their websites and by emailing or calling them. Museums for America and Inspire are very, very similar programs. They're both designed to strengthen museums in serving their public through the core functions of museums, which is learning, community engagement, and collections stewardship and caretaking. Inspire is designed specifically for small museums, and it has no cost share requirement, and it has a ceiling of $50,000. There was such a demand and a need for competition that would be targeting small museums that we created this, and it's been very well received. Museums for America is available to museums of all sizes. It's not just for medium size and big ones. Small ones can apply to it too. It does have a one-to-one cost share requirement, and the ceiling on awards is $250,000. Museums Empowered supports professional development, and that is of the variety that cuts across several departments with a focus on generating internal systemic change. We are very interested in projects that address institutional needs in digital technology, diversity and inclusion, evaluation, and organizational management. And the ceiling here is $250,000, and there's a one-to-one cost share required. And on the right, you see our National Leadership Grants for Museums, very similar to the National Leadership Grants for libraries, in that they take on the big problems. Our feeling is that if we can help solve some of those and make the tools and models and research data available to everyone, then we will be able to spread the benefit of that federal investment. These are often collaborations with several institutions going together. And this is the only program in which we fund research on the museum side. So we award research grants, we award non-research grants, and we also support what we call rapid prototyping projects, which are, if you've got a good little idea that you just want to try out, we would love to help you do that. And if you fail, it's okay, because we'll all have learned something through that. So there's a one-to-one cost share required unless it's otherwise indicated in the 2022 Notice of Funding Opportunity. Right, in our last two here, we have museum grants for African American history and culture. And the point of those is to help build capacity and to support the growth and development of museum professionals at African American museums and HBCUs. There are two funding levels for this program, one up to $50,000 with no cost share, and the other is up to $250,000 with a one-to-one cost share required. Our Native American, Native Hawaiian Museum Services Program supports Indian tribes, federally recognized Indian tribes, and nonprofit organizations that primarily serve Native Hawaiians. But the point is always helping to sustain heritage, culture, and traditional knowledge. These projects can extend up to 2 years, and budgets can go as high as $100,000, and there's never a cost share requirement. So I'm hoping that that was enough to allow a couple of programs to catch your attention, and that you'll investigate those further through our website or giving us a call. I just wanted to review real briefly some hints, tips, and resources for applying to IMLS in particular. And again, some of this may sound familiar because all of us operate according to a shared set of procedures, but if it's relevant to all of us, we think it bears repeating here. So You've seen it before, DUN, SAM, and grants.gov. You will need all three. SAM registrations expire every year. You must renew them. Grants.gov passwords expire every 60 days, and the accounts are deactivated after 365 days of inactivity. And I only mention that because if you're thinking about doing a grant and you don't have anything else to do tonight, check out your registrations. And if you haven't registered yet, tend to that. And it's free. Don't let anybody tell you that they can do this for you faster if you pay them. Change is coming, and we've all been paying attention to this for quite a while. In April of 22, the DUNS system will disappear, and it will be replaced by a new system where the numbers will be assigned by SAM.gov. And that new identifier is being called the Unique Entity Identifier, or UE. No need to worry about that now, but if you want to track this transition, there are a couple of websites where folks are being very good about providing updates. Again, the very best advice to take away today is explore imls.gov. It is the most authoritative and up-to-date source of information about literally everything that we do. Check out the programs, eligibility criteria. We post sample applications for you to look at, and looking at our awarded grants can help you make good choices about what you want to pursue. As my colleagues have noted, key to every application effort is the notice of funding opportunity. These describe the program in great detail. They tell about eligibility requirements. They identify the required and conditionally required documents and give you instructions on how to prepare a complete application. These run anywhere from 35 to 50 pages long, so they're significant. They're downloadable as PDFs, so you can print them out if you like, or just keep them near. We also provide a large number of resources on our website, and here are links to them. All of the notices of funding opportunities are there, as are the sample applications. We have how-to webinars that we record and make available on demand. You can search our database for everything we've funded, and we give you the instructions that we give to peer reviewers so you can see exactly how your application is going to be treated. We also post PDFs of our publications, and all of these relate to museum and library relevant research. We have blogs by grantees and constituents and staff, and we have information on our policy work and partnerships. So check out our publications tab. Review process. Key to IMLS are knowing that applications are reviewed by your peers. And some programs use one tier and others do two. Reviewers use the criteria that we provide and that you can see in the notice of funding opportunities, so there are no secrets here. The IMLS director makes final funding decisions, but he takes into account the peer reviewer opinions, the analyses that we as staff produce, and of course the purposes of the agency programs. Also important to know is that we provide verbatim copies of all the reviewer scores and comments to applicants when decisions are announced. So you can use those to validate your approach to your project, or you can use it to improve an application for submitting the next time around. I always like to point out too that being a peer reviewer is an excellent professional development opportunity. And if you are interested, please check out the webpage listed in the blue box here. We would love to have you. And it's the best way I know to learn how to write a really, really excellent proposal. You've heard this before. Start early, pace yourself, don't bulk it up to the end. Be sure you pick the right program. Be able to identify the key need or challenge that you plan to address. We always say when we're giving out federal money, we want something to get better. We want a problem to be solved. So be able to articulate just exactly what that problem is you're going to take on. We advise you be succinct in your writing. Develop a realistic project timeline. We don't like to fool with those. We want to know what it's going to take you to do the work that you propose. Prepare a budget that makes sense, because we will look at that very carefully, make sure it lines up with the activities that you've proposed. If you can, have somebody else read your application and give you feedback before you turn it in. Proofread, check your math twice, Can't do it enough. And as my colleagues have said, submit to grants.gov early so you can make any necessary corrections. You can access your application and fix things up if you wish. You can also put in applications as many times as you wish. We'll take the last one that you give us before the deadline. Also, as my colleagues have said, please call or email a program officer to talk about your idea and to ask any questions. You'll find names and contact information on the landing pages for each of our grant programs. And also watch our site for information about new grant programs. They're happening all the time. And initiatives, changes, and deadlines, of course, throughout the year. If you'd like to stay in touch with us, you can go to this link and just enter your email address and click the register button, and you'll get all of our electronic communications. And this is my contact information. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about here or would like a copy of this PowerPoint as a PowerPoint, shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you get that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie. Now we will move into our question and answer section of our webinar. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We do know that we are receiving a lot of questions, and we will be sure, if you'd like to reach out to our office, please contact us and we'll make sure to pass your questions along to any of the panelists. Our first question does come from Nancy in Richmond. I'm looking for grants for arts organizations that have been closed due to COVID. So I believe Mary might want to take this.
Sure. So, so the question is looking for grants for COVID support. Yeah. So few opportunities. So the first one is the American Rescue Plan funds that the guidelines will be released in middle of June. That's a really good place to start. That funding deadline should be in later summertime. And then we anticipate it being turned around pretty quickly. The other opportunity is our Grants for Arts projects, which this one is our primary grant program, and it supports all 15 artistic disciplines. And this one would have to be a little bit more project focused. So if there was a specific project that you wanted to do starting next June 2021, you could ask for funding and support for that. And then the third one is the Our Town program, which has an August deadline. And that one's a little bit more specific. That would be for creative placemaking grant activities. So that would be a little bit more of an involved project. So it'd be really specific depending on the organization.
Taylor, if you don't mind me jumping in here,
Absolutely.
There might also be room for NEH funding as well. Depending on what the organization is doing, NEH doesn't fund the creation of art, but we do fund the interpretation of art. And so NEH funding through the American Rescue Plan will be made available through California Humanities sometime in the next month or so. So I would look into that as well.
Great, thank you so much. And one more question for this panel before we move on to our last panel of the day. What grants are available for high school or college age students to pay for education or summer activities that are furthering education? And feel free, any of the panelists, to chime in.
NEH tends to fund things more for teachers. Then we don't really fund things directly for students other than larger nationwide programs such as National History Day, but those aren't direct programs for students.
And the same thing for the Department of Labor. We do not give grants to individuals. We fund organizations to run programs.
Yeah, and the same with the NEA, we don't fund students directly, but one thing you can do on our website, we have a search recent grants, and you can actually search by your zip code or by your town or city or area, and you can bring up grants that we funded and just see if there's anything. We do fund a lot of programs for students, but we fund it through the organization. So that's another way you can try to find a little bit more information.
Great. Well, thank you. to you all for joining us, and please feel free to stick around. And if you have any questions that you see, please feel free to chime in and answer those questions. For our final and last portion of our grants workshop, we will be discussing grants writing and research skills. We are joined by Steve Schultz from the Glenn Price Group and Jennifer Peck, President and CEO of Partnership for Children and Youth. We will now turn things over to you both.
I think Steve is kicking us off, so I'm not sure.
Well, thank you for being here. And I guess we have time for one more question.
There he is.
Oh, okay, perfect. There's Steve.
So Taylor, I'm not sure we have time to do our session. That's my concern. And I think Jennifer and I checked in and would be happy to offer a session at another time for people.
Why don't we go ahead and get started? That's okay. I know that we are okay with going over. If we need to, we do have time to hear. I know a lot of people did want to hear about grants writing and research skills as well. So please feel free to take as much time as you need, and we will allow for Q&A after as well.
Okay. We'll have a go at it. I think we had originally talked about extending till 2:45. So
yep, we have time.
But I'm wondering, are we able to go past that amount of time, or
if we need to, I will definitely let you know, but I think we're okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So great to be with you, everyone. Our thanks to Congressman DeSaulnier for inviting us to be part of this session today. It's really terrific that the Congressman provides this opportunity for constituent organizations to learn about all the different opportunities for funding from the federal government. I learned some things today. Really great to hear from people from all these different agencies. So Jennifer and I are going to really stream through this just as quickly as possible and hope to have some time for questions at the end. So just some key topics we want to cover: assumptions and trends in government grant funding, what makes the process of seeking government grants unique, so it's different from foundation funding in some important ways, tools for researching federal and state grants, how you prepare competitive grant applications, and how to make good choices about whether to apply or not. It's a big investment of time and resources to apply for a federal grant, so you really need to think carefully about whether it's a good choice to go forward. So government grants are not free money. There are always expectations attached to government grants. Government agencies have goals they want to achieve, as you heard from some of the previous panelists, and grants are a way to do this. They also, grants for, advance a legislative agenda by kind of defining a program and then identifying local entities that are going to carry that program out. The greatest likelihood of your being successful is for you to be able to demonstrate in your application to a government funder that you're the right organization to achieve those goals of the agency, and that the needs in your community are significant, that you have high capacity as an organization. So there's some important trends in federal grant funding that you might want to think about. There's more focus on research-based programs. So looking at evidence-based programs and using those in your project. There's some greater focus on being accountable, and that means stricter reporting standards, and it means you have to have your organization together in terms of your administrative and fiscal management. whoops. Sorry about that. There are required matching, and more there are required matching resources. That's an important thing to think about. Some organizations, just if you don't have the match, that is just, it's not going to work for you. There's more emphasis now on collaboration and partnerships. So thinking about strong organizations that you can work together with on a grant project is important. And then sustainability, so providing evidence that you can continue to carry out program activities after the government funding has ended. Just a couple things to highlight here. So government grants are more specific. They come from specific federal agencies, so they're less broadly focused than foundation funding. They often cycle over a number of years. So if you missed an opportunity in one year, you can apply in the next year, or you might be able to get continuing grants over multiple years. There's usually a pretty short timeline from when you hear about the grant till when it's due, something like 4 to 6 weeks. So you really need to stay on top of grant announcements in order to have enough time to apply. And government grants are often for larger amounts of money than foundation grants. They're more competitive for that reason. There's more scrutiny of federal grant applications, so you need to really show your capacity. The application process is more impersonal. Relationships matter more if you're applying to foundations. And usually there's a lot more description about or restrictions in terms of what the format and content of the application should look like. So grants.gov is a good place to find out about grants. The websites of the agencies, those that were represented today, also websites of national and state organizations who are involved in the service area of their organization will often provide updates on grant opportunities as they come up. Let's see, I'll skip this stuff. So building strong narratives for a grant, you want to be able to tell a compelling story. That's very important. Even though federal grants are more impersonal, you want to provide illustrations of the need. You want to have compelling data. And then you also really want to show your organization's capacity to do the work. You know, show that you're able to carry out the project successfully. You should also avoid jargon that's kind of just for the reason that often federal grant reviewers may not be specialists in the area that your grant is being written in. So you want to use kind of general layperson's language. We have a structured tool that we use to explore grant opportunities. I'm not going to go through this in detail just due to limitations on time, but you can request. That form is available through the Congressman's office, and it's it helps you make some key decisions about whether you want to go forward for funding. So just thinking about when that grant opportunity is due, are you an eligible organization? Do you need to provide a match? If so, how much? What's the number of awards? So if it's 10 awards nationally, that's very competitive. That may be a reason to not apply. Thinking about benefits and costs to your organization and to the community is important. And then finally, does the grant opportunity align with your overall organizational priorities? There's a phrase you might have heard called mission drift. So that involves kind of seeking after funds just because they're available, but that may not be aligned and they can take your organization off track. So you want to make sure that a specific grant aligns with what your goals are and priorities as an organization. So I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to talk about foundation grants.
Thanks, Steve. So just really quickly, if you could go back a slide, as just a touch of background that's relevant to the few things I'm going to go through is that I founded my nonprofit 20 years ago. And when I did that, I had never raised money before and had to figure it all out as I went along. So everything I have to share comes from trial and error and a lot of experience and a lot of successes and failures along the way. And I'll also just say our organization is primarily funded by private foundations, after a lot of assessment about, the ways in which a small organization like ours can successfully raise money. So I just wanted to give that little bit of context, which I think is important. So you can go to the next slide. As Steve talked about, while government grant fundraising is really all about what's in the content of your proposal, the narrative, the financials, your capacity, how competitive you are, the forms, the paperwork, all of those things. Foundation fundraising is really just the opposite. It is so heavily weighted to the relationship that you as an individual, more so even than your organization as a whole, has with the person you develop a relationship with at the foundation. And they really, need to understand who you are as a person and a leader in order to have faith and trust in funding your organization. And what I have found is that in order to really build that relationship and trust over time, it's really important to start with telling your own personal story about why you are in this work, what drives you, what your passion is, and then connecting that to the work of your organization, and then telling the story of your work. I have a few times in 20 years tried to reach out cold to a foundation that I didn't have an introduction or connection to first, and that I think it really almost never works. The vast majority of foundations do not take unsolicited requests. And so it's the relationship piece really can't be overestimated. And I think, the two things that have to be in place to be successful in raising money from foundations are your organization has to have a mission that's aligned with what that foundation does. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then they have to really trust and have faith in you as a person. You can go to the next slide. So in order to really build that trust and relationship and get foundations interested in your work, it's really important to provide more than one way of giving them a flavor of what you do and the impact that your organization has. And so, what we have done is a mix of sharing reports and news stories about our work, in addition to letters of request and phone calls and things like that. It's really important to find a range of ways to communicate on a very consistent basis with foundations, whether they are existing funders or whether you're trying to get them in the door. And this is another thing I just really can't stress enough, the importance of being both patient and consistent in your relationship building with foundations. We have some foundations that it took me 5+ years of consistent communication and outreach to finally get them to invite a proposal. And what I typically do, I have a long list of funders, some of whom have funded us before and some whom have never funded us, but I know they are a match for what we do. And even the ones that have never funded us and have ignored me for years, I consistently, at least 4 to 6 times a year will send them something when we have a report come out, and I'll send a personal note, or there's a news story about our work and I'll send them a personal note, and, without an ask, and just say, I thought you might be interested in seeing this, hope all is well with you, as a way to stay on their radar and to really be ready when the timing is right for an invitation to come along. And I think that's an important thing to know about foundations, is that what they might fund in one year, even though they lay out their mission and their vision very carefully, it might be different the next year. You know, they do strategic planning every few years, just like nonprofits do. And oftentimes it's all about timing and staff change. And so I just think the consistent outreach and staying on their radar screen is incredibly important. Next slide. A quick thing on researching foundations, sort of how do you find them to begin with and the ones that might be a fit for you. You know, there's ways you can do this on your own, and we as a very small organization have always done this through our own research, but you can also buy foundation search software if you have the resources for that, and there's several out there. There's one called Candid that Steve was recommending. But what we have typically done with our limited amount of resources for research and development are, you know, we kind of scan similar organizations to ours that have similar missions and have similar focus areas. And we go on their websites and look at, oh, who is funding them, and think, maybe they might be interested in us also. So that's one way we develop our lists. We also take a look at which foundations are sponsoring conferences and events in our field. Sometimes that gives us a clue about which ones we should be talking to. And then for our existing funders, we're very assertive about asking them for invitations and introductions to funders that they know, because it's often impossible to get a meaningful conversation with a foundation representative without an introduction from a trusted source. And this could come from an existing funder, or it could come from a nonprofit colleague. We also tend to talk to our nonprofit colleagues, and when we know that a certain funder is supporting them, we ask them if they would be willing to make an introduction, and most people are. So those are some of the ways that we do the researching of the foundations that we're able to find. And I'm going to wrap it up there because I know that we're out of time and want to leave any last moments we have for any Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Stephen. Yes, we do have a few questions for you both. So we'll start with our first question. It comes from Catherine from El Cerrito. She would like to know, what are the must-dos to be competitive in the federal grant process?
Let's see. Well, you need to have a 501c3 registration. That's just kind of the most fundamental thing of all. You've got to have some kind of, you need to be some kind of a registered organization in order to be eligible to receive government grant funding, or have a sponsor organization. I think it's important to start small, and so maybe before you go after government grant funding, you do kind of apply and receive foundation funding as a starting point, or apply as a partner with other organizations for federal funding, so you can kind of dip your toe in the water. I think, I mean, the most important thing that we talk about in terms of responding to a government grant opportunity is that your application is responsive. That's a term we use. So meaning that you've looked at everything they're asking for in that funding opportunity and addressed it in some way in your application, whether it's in the your project narrative that you've written, or your letters of support, or in your budget in terms of how the funds are directed, so that your priorities for funding align also with the expectations of the funder. So that would be a few things that I think would be important and relevant if you're applying for government grants.
If I could just throw one thing in there, you know, as an organization who has done very little government grant seeking, I think it's incredibly important to assess your capacity, both to apply, but also to manage federal grant funds, because it's an enormous amount of work. So you have to have a certain amount of capacity and size on the fiscal management side, the paperwork side, in order to be able to manage it. And the one time that we went for a large federal grant, we did it in collaboration with other nonprofits in order to put our resources and capacity together, which made a lot more sense. And so that's just one thing I would suggest considering.
Yeah, agreed, Jennifer. That's one of the key items in the cost column of the bid no bid analysis is what are the expectations of the funder in terms of tracking and reporting and all of that. And you really do need to consider that as people say, grants they're not just free money, they're really some significant expectations that come with them that you need to be aware of.
Great. Well, thank you both for that. We have one more question. Are there any application fees associated with applying for federal grants? And it's a two-part question. May you apply for more than one grant at a time?
No, there are not application fees. If you're paying for the services of a grant, somebody who's helping you with a grant application, that's going to be an expenditure that you would need to consider. There's no limitations on applying for more than one grant at a time. I mean, sometimes grant opportunities are like a multi-part grant opportunity, and there'll be different pieces you can apply for, and you may be restricted to applying for one component of that. The one thing you might need to consider sometimes is if you are applying for multiple grants, is whether there's any kind of overlap in the services that those are delivering, and so you'd want to make sure that there wouldn't be duplication of services that are getting funded from different sources.
Jennifer, did you want to add to that one, or?
No, I don't have anything to add.
All right, we are going to do one more question. We are a women-led nonprofit that is building climate literacy K-12 students and empowering them to take action in their local communities. What kinds of grants should we be looking for?
Can I throw an idea out there first?
Yeah, go.
That's very timely. So K-12 education is about to receive an unprecedented amount of additional funding, both from the state and the federal governments, from COVID recovery programs. And so, the state very recently put out $4.6 billion for programs in the category of expanded learning, meeting, additional supports for high need students. There's more money coming through the state budget and then through the federal relief package as well. There's a lot of money for enrichment programs, supplemental education programs, after school and summer programs. Much of this money is going to run through school districts, and school districts are really needing partners in order to be able to develop and offer these kinds of programs to all of the students who need them. And the kind of program that you're talking about, I think really fits with the category of the after school and summer enrichment dollars, of which there is literally billions of dollars coming. And so I would definitely connect right away with school districts in the area in which you are working to talk about whether you can be a program provider to students around the program that you're offering. That's one thing I would really, really recommend.
That's a great answer, Jennifer. I would just add, and I mentioned it before, to I think the kind of program you're talking about might be more likely to get funding from foundations rather than federal programs, but it's a good idea to kind of just do, in terms of this large amount of money that's coming out through COVID related funding. It's really useful to just do some research online. It can be pretty confusing, like where that money is going and what's available. So there are education organizations and other programs that are kind of doing a deep dive into what that funding is about and how it's being distributed. And so I would really encourage you to go on some of those websites that where they have someone on staff who's done research on how COVID related funding is getting distributed and what opportunities are out there.
Great. Well, that's going to wrap up our section for the Q&A for you both. And Steve, thank you so much. And Jennifer, thank you as well. And just to let you know, that's going to be thank you to all of our panelists. And if you'd like to rewatch the event, again, we did record this event and it will be on our upcoming June grants newsletter. If you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter, please email me directly at taylor.kimber@mail.house.gov. Again, that is taylor.kimber@mail.house.gov. For those of you that have any further questions for our panelists, please do not hesitate to reach out to our office. We can definitely pass your question along to any of the panelists that presented today. And we want to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you.